Well, the witching hour is here, so we will start. Marion instructs me to tell you that there is no mistake in the cover. Presumably she's referring to the fact that there are 8 circles on the front. It's just a nice pretty pattern. There is no significance to it. This is the Western malaise. We try and read significance into everything that we see. Before we start on today's material, which will be section 3, starting on page 6, is there anything arising out of what we were talking about this time yesterday, which you would like to talk about before we move on? Well, there you are. Silence denotes acceptance. So I assume that you have understood everything I said yesterday without fail.
I've got a note here. It says 6 summary, consciousness of hierarchies. Can you think why I put that note?
No. Not a mind reader.
Yes.
Oh, I know what it was. It's okay, no question.
It's homework.
Homework. Would I do that to you? Again, just before we start on today's material, I was reminded by what Ianthe was saying almost immediately before we broke for tea of a passage in the early part of the Secret Doctrine which is saying, it seems to me, something very similar to what she was quoting from Bowen's The Occult Way. And although I won't read it to you in full, I will just draw your attention to it. It is on page 37 of volume 1 in the original edition. It's the commentary on sloka 2 of stanza 1. The time was not sloka. And it's less than a page, the whole commentary, and it's well worth your reading at some time. In particular, there's a sentence about 5 or 6 lines into it where she says, "Nothing on earth has real duration, for nothing remains without change or the same for the billionth part of a second. And the sensation we have of the actuality of the division of time known as the present comes from the blurring of that momentary glimpse or succession of glimpses of things that our senses give us, as those things pass from the region of ideals, which we call the future, to the region of memories we call the past." It's a lovely passage and well worth your time to study, but I won't sidetrack myself and talk about it any further. It was drawn to my mind by what Ianthe was saying, and it seems to chime in very much with it. Yesterday we were talking about the 7 kingdoms of nature, who I suggested were the actors in the drama of cyclic evolution. If the 7 kingdoms and the monads are the actors, then the planet is, from one point of view, the stage, the backdrop. It's the environment in which, as far as we are concerned, the drama of evolution takes place. But such is the nature of our participatory cosmos that we cannot neatly label it as such. It is, as it says in the first sentence of the first point, a living being, and it has its own constitution, its own evolutionary journey to fulfill as well. So we are left with this moving picture the whole time however we try and nail things down a little so that we can study them, they have a nasty habit of moving underneath our fingers just as we start to look at it. And the planet, or the globe, however we wish to refer to it, falls into just that category. If one theme seems to be emerging more than any other from what we've been talking about so far amongst the four speakers, is the idea of process, certainly, and as far as I'm concerned, the one idea which I'm going to be stressing more than anything else, I guess, is that everything is alive. The corollary, there is no dead matter. Now, I stress this at the outset of this particular section for reasons which I hope will become apparent fairly shortly. I can remember back in my early theosophical and other studies, however I tried to figure this to myself, it always seemed to me that however much I said to myself, yes, spirit and matter is a continuum of states, that there is not two things but one, somehow or another the matter still ended up at the bottom somehow or other as the bits which we all used, and the spirit somehow ended up at the top and represented the beings and the consciousness. And for a long time, implicitly, without necessarily stating it to myself in this point, that's the view that I got. And it wasn't until quite some years into my theosophical studies when I encountered the pamphlet that Yancey was referring to today, this Madame Blavatsky on how to study theosophy, that I came across this expression, there is no dead matter, every last atom is alive. And more than that, she says in another place, I'll have to paraphrase because I don't have it in front of me. She said, there are no spaces or akasha in which elementals besport themselves like trout in water. That's a common idea, she says, and equally quite wrong. We have to get the idea that every last particle is a life and is living. So when we talk about what appears to us to be the environment, the globe, in this case the planet, or in which we evolve, or indeed when we talk about any material object, we cannot discard it or classify it as being material and say, oh, well, that's what the whole thing rests on, that's the base of the pyramid, that's the matter at the bottom of the stack, and everything else is built on top of that. Because even whatever is at the bottom of the stack, if indeed there is a bottom of the stack, is living. The whole lot, from top to bottom, is living. And this, to me, as it gradually sank in as to what she meant, was, a real eye-opener. A real eye-opener. Maybe for you this is easy. It wasn't easy for me to finally grasp what she was talking about. But once I had cottoned on to what she was saying, once I'd realized what she meant, that she really did mean that literally everything was living, then you haven't got a hierarchical pyramid-like structure with the matter at the bottom and the spirit at the top, and a sort of gradually you're getting more and more aware and awake as you get towards the top. But you're all resting on the bottom, which is the matter at the bottom of the stack. That it wasn't like that. Then a completely new and very dynamic picture began to emerge. And as I say, once you begin to really accept this fundamental proposition which she's putting forward, then much else becomes a lot easier to comprehend. So, for instance, turning to the notes that you have in the book, our planet Earth, it says, is a living being, and like man has its 7 principles. It's the first sentence there. By no means is this any of my invention or fancy. The passages which you have in the second part, starting on page 37 in the book, justify exactly these statements, and I would like to draw your attention to these. Did I say 57? I'm sorry, I should have said 57. In fact, if you'd like to turn to 58 for a moment, it's a passage I will come back to, but just for the moment to draw your attention to it, because I regard it as being fundamental to something that I have to say this afternoon. The paragraph 3.2 on page 58 is an extract from the Mahatma letters, and it says, "The correspondence between a mother globe and her child man may be thus worked out. Each have their 7 principles." And then it goes on to enumerate what those principles are. But do you see what we are seeing here? That the globe, every bit as much as man, is a living being, a living entity, and is constructed, if constructed it is, on exactly the same lines as we are. And this, again, to me is a very fundamental insight, and one of the things which begins to emerge from a study of the material in the Secret Doctrine and the Mahatma letters, and it's a theme which is going to re-emerge as we move through these particular sections, and that is tied up in that famous Hermetic axiom, as above, so below, as is the inner, so is the outer, as is the great, so is the small. Well, we hear these things, yes, we nod sagely when we hear these things, but do we really believe them? Well, once you begin to see the sorts of illustrations of what this means, that, as we are seeing here, then perhaps the significance of those ground rules does become more apparent. The planet is a living being. It, therefore, we presume, has a consciousness. After all, I'm conscious, and if it's built and designed on the same sorts of lines that I am, then presumably it's conscious too. I don't know what its consciousness is like. I don't pretend to be able to tell you anything about its consciousness. But at least we can work out some of these parallels. And as we will see, just in the same way as that we physically are gestated, are born, mature, grow old and die, so the same is true of the globe. It is patterned in the same way that we are. It too, gestated, was born, developed, matured, will grow old, and will die. And its body will disintegrate, just as our physical body will disintegrate. The parallels are there throughout. And to me, it makes the whole thing a lot more readily comprehensible once we begin to see the uniformity of the processes which underpin both planet, the larger scale, the solar system, the galaxy, as well as man, and moving down the scale, even down to the atom and so forth. All of these are living beings and follow a similar progression in the process of their life cycle. Now, the next major idea which I want to draw your attention to in trying to say a little bit about the planet comes in the second paragraph on 3.2, initially on page 6. And there's a sentence towards the about 5 lines down where it says, "All 7 kingdoms are aspects of the planetary being." This is very much borne out with the passage that we will be looking at on page 58, where she will identify these. What is interesting, I think, about that particular statement, about the kingdoms being involved, it shows that the actual fabric of the planet is a living fabric throughout. We saw yesterday, after all, that the 7 kingdoms are the basic actors in the drama. Now we're being told that the planet is nothing other than those 7 kingdoms of nature. They fashion the habitat. They fashion the fabric of the planet itself. So what seems to us as inanimate at one level is nothing other than lives belonging to, part of, an expression of some other kingdom of nature in one of its many degrees. You begin to see something of the economy of nature. The model which rather appeals to me in this is drawn from what we see of the economy of nature on our planet itself. You, I'm sure, are, if only superficially, familiar with what we mean by ecology, where we see the balance of nature, and we see cycles or circles where one species depends on another, who in turn depends on another, and depends on another, and it may turn out to be a closed loop where a whole sequence or a whole series of species depend on one another, and what one provides is consumed by the other, and what that provides is consumed by another, and so forth. And there's a whole chain of dependencies, one on another, supporting it. And it's not as if it's a pyramidical structure where everything's dependent on whatever is at the bottom of the structure, and somebody very privileged is at the top and lives on the fat of the land, but it's a circle, and the dependencies are one on another. It's a complete cycle. There's on the back of the 50p coin when it first came out, I don't know whether mine has that on the back of it, no, on the back of the 50p coin when it came out, there were 9 hands holding one another. So this wrist grasped that one, and this wrist grasped the next one, and so forth, until you had 9 hands, each grasping the wrist of the one in front of it. And it was intended to symbolize the 9 members of the community, of the European Economic Community at the time we joined it. And what it seems to me, we have in ecology is very much this: one grasping another, grasping another, grasping another in a circle, each dependent on the other. So it seems to me it is with the various kingdoms of nature who support and provide the environment for the planet itself. Now, another idea which to me is central in the nature of a discussion of what we mean by the planet is this. When we talk of man, just what exactly do we mean by man? Well, of course, we can define man in any number of ways. We can define him in terms of function, in terms of consciousness, to a degree in terms of structure, and so forth. But for convenience sake, in terms of what we said yesterday, we will say that what we mean by man for the time being is that unit consciousness, which is as a result of the life wave underpinning the whole human kingdom. But in order to express that consciousness, we require, as we know, so many vehicles, we say, of expression. Vehicles is a funny word to use, isn't it? It sounds like driving a car. I didn't think it was intended that way originally, but in our 20th century, they didn't have vehicles, I think, at the time that term was coined. However, I expect you know what we mean by it. Vehicles of expression, the physical body as a physical vehicle, and so on, we say. Now, nobody would make the mistake of thinking that the physical body was the man, but equally, nobody would make the mistake of thinking that we could dispense with it and still carry out our function. As Yanthi was saying earlier this afternoon, talking about the exercise of non-identification with the vehicles, one may correctly say from one point of view, I am not my body, I am not my mind, and so forth. But equally and paradoxically, from another point of view, you could equally say, I jolly well am my body, because without it, I'm not here at all. And there wouldn't be anybody to say I'm not my body if you hadn't got one in the first place. And equally, if I haven't got a mind, who is going to make any pronouncements on the fact that I haven't got a mind? You need a mind in order to be able to say that at all. So there is two sides to this particular question. But we accept, I think, that there are any number of modes of being which we call vehicles, modes of expression. These are not the man himself, but are central to, are vital to, the function, the process, in order that the man, the centre of consciousness, the essential being, should express itself, make itself present, grow and evolve. It needs these modes of expression. Well, where do they come from? Well, they're all borrowed from somewhere else. They are not ours. And ultimately, we have to give them back when our particular usage of them is over. And to illustrate that, I might draw your attention to a passage that we did not look at yesterday, which is on page 54, which is in section 2. I won't get too far into this because I don't want to use this to do anything more than illustrate the immediate point at hand. Passage at the very bottom of page 54, passage from the Mahatma Letters, details what happens after death and identifies what happens to our so-called vehicles, sometimes called principles in a rather misleading fashion. So it says, thus the body of man is wedded to and remains forever within the body of his planet. His individual jivatma, life principle, what we would perhaps call prana, that which is called in physiology animal spirits, returns after death to its source fohat. His linga sharira, sometimes called his astral body, will be drawn into akasha. His kama rupa will recommingle with the universal shakti, the will force, or universal energy. His animal soul, what we would normally call the karma manasic element within us, borrowed from the breath of the universal mind, will return to the Dayan Chohans. So in other words, after death, bit by bit, all the various elements which we have borrowed from elsewhere are returned to their sources. So they're not yours exactly, although you have used them, nor are they essential to what it is, that is, moving forward in the cyclic process. Well, if that's true of man, would it not be fair to assume that the same is true of the planet, and that whatever clothes the planet is again borrowed from elsewhere? So just as there is, if we will, the essential man who is re-embodied time after time, borrowing the material from elsewhere, so the same is true of the planet. There is the essential planet, shall we say, in some form or another, and it too is re-embodied just as we are reincarnated. We are told that within the period of the lifetime of the solar system, it's re-embodied 7 times. In a sense, that's neither here nor there, apart from the fact that it establishes the principle that it does re-manifest itself again and again through different forms. The same life is expressing itself through different forms on 7 major occasions. Well, if that is the case, what does it borrow in order to clothe itself? Well, it borrows the units of the other 7 kingdoms of nature that we've talked about. We, you, I, and the animals, and the plants, and the minerals, and the elementals clothe whatever is the essential planet. We provide its garments. We provide its vehicles. It's a rather intriguing point of view, isn't it? Because you don't think of yourself as the material, do you? You think of yourself as the consciousness and the life. But looked at from the point of view of the planet, whatever the essential planet is, he regards you as his vehicles. And you are to him what your body is to you.
It's a human kingdom.
Amongst others. Which is the human... Sorry, what does that remark mean?
Well, You were talking to us individually. The human kingdom is his sphere.
Amongst others.
Yeah.
Yes, indeed. Yes. Now that is what is indicated in that passage that we started to read on page 58. And if you'd like to look at it again now, we'll carry on with the passage. And how much more of this you will understand, I don't know. I don't know that I understand much more of it, apart from the basic principles which I've just outlined. But it's worth taking it just a little bit further. Having got as far as we did, both have their 7 principles we had read. In the globe, the elementals, of which there are in all 7 species, form 3 things. Form A, a gross body; B, her fluidic double, or linga shariram; C, her life principle, jiva. Now, we haven't yet said anything much about the elementals. Perhaps we should have said a little bit about them yesterday in the section on the 7 kingdoms of nature. So perhaps we should remedy that omission to some slight extent here. To get very far into the question of elementals would, I suspect, lead us rather far astray from our general purpose, which is supposed to be talking about cyclic evolution. However, having said that we shouldn't think in terms of pyramids, for just a brief moment I will fall back into talking about pyramids and draw a nice little pyramid anyway, but I'll leave an open-ended pyramid just to show that I don't know where the bottom really is. In terms of form, we can imagine a pyramid in which the bottom of the pyramid is made up of what I shall call elementals or elemental life. I make this distinction because if I say that they're elementals, you will all too rapidly run away with the idea of gnomes and sylphs and salamanders and other little fairy-like creatures, which is not what we mean by elementals. That is so peripheral to the subject as to be distinctly misleading. Next in our pyramid, we would come to the mineral kingdom. Plant. Animal and man. Convenient that man is only 3 characters, because I can fit it in quite easily. Now, if we had left out elemental at the bottom, we would have all heartily concurred with this pyramid. We all realize that everything above requires the mineral kingdom in order to exist at all. All 3 are built substantially out of carbon, hydrogen, oxygen and nitrogen, which as chemical elements are undoubtedly part and parcel of the mineral kingdom. We all require that much. As we move up the scale in terms of progression, so the plant certainly requires the mineral, but is obviously a degree of complexity on top of that in terms of structure, cell structure, response, and all the other functions that the plant is capable of. The animal in this is not intended to indicate that the animals eat the plants, although that may well be the case. It's intended to represent a progression in terms of development, so that the animal cell, which is really the basis of animal life, is really a development from the plant cell. And where the plant cell is capable of a limited range of function and response, the animal cell, out of which animal structures are built, is capable of a much wider range of responses and so forth. And then in this instance, man is really in that sense, in terms of physical form is a refined animal using the same material as is available in the animal kingdom, but is that much more specialized in its form. That far down we would have all reasonably, without quibbling too much, have concurred with. It's when you add this part underneath the mineral kingdom, and I have deliberately left this open-ended. This is not the bottom of the pyramid, and I have no idea where the bottom of the pyramid does go, or indeed whether there is a bottom to the pyramid. I think we would be safer to assume that the pyramid had no bottom. Rather frightening concept, but let's leave it that way for the moment. The elementals are there to sustain the whole structure above it. That means that elementals are not some rather curious adjunct addition to life, and as we, in our elementary days of studying theosophy, we hear that this plant has got an elemental, and this tree has got an elemental, and my cat has got an elemental. This is not what we mean in this instance at all. That may or may not be the case. That is almost completely irrelevant to what is being said here. In this sense, it represents a kingdom of nature, an order of life and being, which subsumes the whole structure above it. Without that, the mineral could not exist. It is a stage in the development on which the mineral is built. Just as it's reasonably easy to see that you could not possibly have plant forms without the mineral substance out of which the cells and the other structures could be built, so we are saying that the mineral could not possibly have been formed had it not been for the elemental life which underlay it altogether. So it is as real and as fundamental as anything else. The difference is that we don't see it, or we don't see it readily. We say that the four kingdoms enumerated, man, animal, plant and mineral, are objective, and by this we mean that their forms are objective to our presently constituted sight and senses. The elemental is not objective in that sense, but from an occult point of view, it is every bit as important. And it is this which is, as we shall see later on, vital to the construction of the globe. This rather novel idea that the elementals are vital and essential to the kingdoms which come beyond, you might like to just briefly draw your attention to a passage on page 52. Very little reference is made to this idea. Very little reference is made to the idea of elementals at all, a subject on which they keep very quiet on the whole, and we are left to infer what we may. But I would draw your attention to a passage on page 52, the second quoted passage, the one under where it says the following passage is a description of. It doesn't matter what the context of this paragraph is, it's just the little sentence within it which appears. It's in fact talking about what's going to happen at the rebirth of worlds after a solar pralaya, but that is really neither here nor there. The old elementals, in other words, from the previous system, will rest until they are called to become, in their turn, the bodies of mineral, vegetable, and animal entities. And that is the essential passage. And as I say, I didn't add the emphasis there, the Mahatmas did. That's their underscoring, underlining. It was they who regarded that as important. Without them, the inference is, there would be no mineral, plant, or animal entities. So, coming back to, after that brief diversion, coming back to where we were on page 58. In the parallels between man and the globe, the elementals provide those three fundamental principles for the planetary being, whatever that may be. Just as we require an outermost expression, which in our case is a physical body, a linga sharira or astral body, and its prana or vital principle, just as we have what we call a physical triad, through which everything else is expressed, so it is for the planetary life. As it happens, in its case, the outermost expression is provided by three kingdoms of elementals. They do not elaborate on this. They are referred to again, and we'll come back to this concept when next week we get round to talking about the rebirth of globes, and we see this whole picture again from the point of view of the birth of the planet. And you will see then that around whatever the planetary being is, first to arrive is the elemental kingdoms, and it's they who do the first preliminary work, and then in their successive orders build on the work of one another until sufficient work has been done for a mineral form to manifest itself. And the mineral life wave can do its work, and the first objective globe begins to appear. And that's where the story that physicists and astronomers can talk about begins. They can only tell you about the physical globe with the mineral kingdom. What they cannot tell you about, because they cannot see it any more than you and I can see it, is that underpinning that whole material structure that we see are three kingdoms of elementals which have prepared the ground.
Are you prepared to take questions?
Yes.
That process seems to fit fine if you're thinking in terms of globe D. But what about the other globes? Is the development of a chain a seriatim process, or is it all at one go, pari passu?
It's difficult to answer.
I haven't got a clue on
Well,
that.
I've got some answers, but I don't know where to start.
Well, perhaps we'd better leave it for another time.
Well, we'll leave it for the moment.
Yeah.
We'll come back to it if we may, because it may well become clearer
Yeah.
when we've got a little bit further. Yes.
Perhaps a silly question, but can you clarify when it says the sixth principle or spiritual soul is man? Presumably it's only one aspect of man. It's not all the seven principles you're thinking of.
In each case, when it talks about what it is that embodies the principles of the globe, we are talking about the kingdom as we were talking about them yesterday, I believe. We're talking about what is essential to that kingdom, what characterizes that particular kingdom. So, yes, we're not really talking about man in terms of his physical bodies, although, in a sense, it's included, because without the physical development, we wouldn't be here at all, and we would be incapable of carrying out our function. So, in a sense, even that much is integral with what we are. And certainly all our psychological development, warts and all, as we would say, with all our imperfections and faults, is still part of what we are, and that is within what we would broadly call the human life wave. It's the whole broad front of human evolution. As Joy was saying earlier, with all the inherent risks of failure built into that, that's what makes us human. We cannot discount that, and all of that is what, for his sins, this planetary entity has inherited as his sixth principle. You might think this particularly unattractive, but that's apparently, according to this, what it amounts to.
Isn't that, Adam, why we're talking with correspondences, not not identities here?
Right.
So that
Right.
it's the totality of what is the human kingdom
Yes.
that constitutes for the globe
Mhm.
the sixth principle.
Yes.
It's not an easy concept to grasp.
Not in the
I quite
least.
Not
at least.
And it's
Right.
something you really have to work over again and again
Mhm.
to see that from one point of view, all man's 7 principles constitute one principle of the globe.
That's true. That's true. Yes. And in the Mass, without regard to
Yes.
detail.
Yeah.
Mm. Mm. Yes, it does take a lot of grasping. I've been working on that for a number of years, and I'm still groping with it. So
How do you read or understand the phrase, the elementals, of which there are in all 7 species?
I would read that in the same sense that we talk about 7 elements.
Would you?
Yes.
Mhm.
In the way that the elementals are an expression of the Daim Chohans.
Generally, we refer to 3 elemental kingdoms,
Yes.
and so within each, is there 7 species?
I would say so.
In each of those, that's...
I would say so, yes. If I were a man drawing into drawing diagrams, which, as you see, I am, I would tend to draw it something like this, with a 7-fold
Yes.
division.
Mhm.
How many have I got there? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. We'll have another one, and then say,
Mhm.
make a stratified
Yes.
division across there,
Yes.
and say that within each division, within each elemental kingdom, a 7-fold
Sevenfold.
quality pervades them,
Yes.
which would be
That's the way I would read it.
Yeah,
honestly.
because go on into the main life.
indeed, because whatever these 7 species are of elementals will presumably continue to persist.
To persist all the way,
Yes, and will ultimately culminate in this very misleading doctrine of the 7 rays,
Yes,
Mhm.
which is talked about in the human kingdom.
yes,
There are 7 species of man
yes.
in exactly the same way that there are 7 species of elementals.
The correspondence, I think sometimes we think of the correspondences then as identities, which they are not. They
Correct.
are correspondences.
Right. Yes, this
In
is
one sense, perhaps this elemental which you've left open, with which I agree, may be also the interface with what science calls antimatter.
could be. I don't know. I don't
Until
know.
what?
Antimatter,
Oh,
so that it moves through.
Mm. Mm.
I was thinking maybe that stage of formation of the globe, when they cannot say is gas, or is this, or is that, they still don't, is in the middle of
Mm. This presumably is the process of condensation out of the elemental. What the elemental has done is to provide a field or a matrix in and around which the mineral then is aggregated or condenses and is drawn into a structure. But this is to anticipate a little where we will be going later on. I'm still really concerned with just some root ideas here. The other principles are enumerated in this passage, but perhaps we won't dwell on that too much, because I think the others are a little bit easier, fractionally easier to grasp than that of the elemental kingdoms. So seeing as we do not have an infinite amount of time, perhaps we will move on a little. I would like further to draw your attention to the passage, the paragraph 3.4, initially on page 7. The key sentence being the first one, where it says, "The globe as a whole is the expression of an indwelling planetary spirit." Now, the term planetary spirit is used extensively in the Secret Doctrine, especially in Volume 2, but you'll find it in Volume 1 as well. This paragraph, the way I have expressed it here, I don't think that I have ever managed to find one which puts it in quite that way. That, you may say, is my inference from the material. The Secret Doctrine, in the way in which it is expressed, personifies the story and puts words into the mouths of certain entities, which plainly is allegory. I don't imagine, for instance, that the Lipica at any one time say, "This is good," as they are reputed to have said in one of the stanzas, any more than do I imagine that the spirit of the earth ever complains to the sun, as she is supposed to have done in the first stanza of Volume 2, the second set of stanzas. They have been personified. It has been made into a human story to a degree. However, it can only be allegorized if there is an element of real hardcore truth there in the first place. The problem is that there is no way that we could possibly comprehend the nature of a planetary spirit as we are now. So what we use is myth and allegory in order to show some of the correspondences and make some sort of appeal to things that we do know. However, the general guidelines that we have established are that the planet is a being, it has its 7 principles, something of its essence reincarnates or re-embodies itself over vast periods of time. So there has to be an entity, a root entity, in this process, and that, I believe, is what is referred to here as the planetary spirit. Now, what I would strongly ask you not to do in your own conceptions here is to personalize this. There has been, in my view, a lot of nonsense talked about planetary logoses, or should I say logoi, and the like, as if they were some grand beings that we could in some way communicate with, have a chat with, be on good terms with, be in the consciousness of, and so forth. Don't believe that this could possibly be the case. It would be rather like one of the cells in my hand having a relationship with me, and one of the cells in my hand saying, "Hello, Mr. Warcup. How's it going today? And what's the plan of action for the moment?" The cell and its consciousness is in no way in relationship with my consciousness. It is part of a functioning whole, and it has a purpose to fulfill within the body, which sustains and supports my waking consciousness. They are part of a larger process. Yes, they are involved in this, but they are not related in any way. Just so, I as an individual human being do not have a relationship with this planetary spirit, however much we may allegorize and make poetic fancy of this. So I add this little warning in before we go too much further. Now, I still have a little way to go, but before we do, you'll have to excuse me for about 2 or 3 minutes, and we'll be back. Right. There are 2 other major ideas which I'd like to get across and talk about a little bit in this session. Paragraph 3.5 talks about the 7 globes. We're all familiar with, no doubt, the basic idea that whatever we regard as the planet comprises a chain of 7 globes, and Geoffrey, in the diagrams that he's shown us, has already illustrated this, so the basic idea I need not elaborate. However, the 7 globes which make up our planet are aspects of a higher order being or entity. They are not a collection of 7 bits and pieces floating around in the sky. It is not like saying that the planet Earth that we're on, plus Mars, plus Mercury, plus Jupiter, plus Saturn, put in a bag, makes some higher order entity. This is not the sort of order of thing that we are saying here. The 7 globes, I think, are probably one of the most misleading ideas that we have as Theosophists yet to put about. It's so misleading that the mind, I'm bereft of good ideas as how better to start on this. The diagrams, such as the ones that Geoffrey has referred us to already, are culpably guilty of inculcating just this idea that has caused the problem in the first place, I think, as if they were a series of globes rather like the one on which we find ourselves in the same sort of way. I don't believe that it's like that at all. It's rather in the same way, to give you an analogy, if we were to look at the sevenfold man, we are aware of aspects of our being, a physical aspect of our being, which we call the physical body. We know that from personal experience that there are other psychological, perhaps spiritual aspects of our beings. We are mostly prepared to accept that there are other modes of consciousness in which we are capable of functioning. We are all presumably familiar with dreaming, and in the dream state we are aware of having a body, although it may be rather different in texture and constitution from the one that we're familiar with in our waking state. And with these few pieces of information, we can begin to see that there are a number of modes in which we can function. And in each of these modes, we will have something which is corresponding to a body, a vehicle of expression. Now, do we imagine, if we follow through this analogy, that we have a collection of bodies, rather like a series of Chinese dolls, one sitting inside another, inside another, inside another, and so forth? Well, I hope not. I do hope not. It's really not like that. I don't know how well to present this. I remember, I think it was Joy talking about this. Was it not you who said that you got your students to try and come up with some other ways of representing the sevenfold constitution of man? One way might be to think of whatever is essentially human as at the center of a diagram, and a series of lines, or what you will, emanating from that as representing the modes in which we can express ourselves, and no one of those lines being more important or less important than any other. Perhaps in particular points in the cycle of man's development and evolution, one is emphasized more than another, but so it's not one resting on another or inside another like a series of Chinese dolls. A passage somebody has said already, though I can't remember who or where I've seen it recently, HPB says that the principles are not to be thought of as numbered, but that principle is most important, which is currently emphasized in your nature, and that it was wrong to think of the principles as numbered 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 in a layer, like rather a layered cake, with the various components, one on top of another. If we then take this view, thinking in terms of consciousness now, that man is capable of functioning in a series of different states, none of which is physically or spatially related to any other. When you're dreaming, you do not attempt to think of where you are in relation to your physical body, or not normally. And equally, when you find yourself in Devachan, as I hope you all will, You will not be concerned there of where your physical body is quietly rotting and decaying in its grave. You will be in a different state of being, and presumably, certainly in the Rupa Lokas of Devachan, you will feel yourself to have a physical body. It will be every bit as real, we are told, as the experience you have now of having a physical body. So we know from what we can see, what we can infer, there are a number of modes in which we can express ourselves. Our one central being, our monad if you wish, our centre of consciousness, may express itself in a number of ways. So with what we regard as the planetary being. Imagine, if you will, that the planetary being, whatever that might be, may express itself in a number of modes, and these correspond to, or are, what we call the globes. These are the environments, the 7 modes, the 7 major modes of expression of the overall indwelling life. Now, it manifests itself as the diagram that Geoffrey showed us earlier, briefly in summary, the one on page 200 of SD Volume 1. They manifest themselves on different planes, which is merely another way of saying that they have different natures, are differently constituted, in which perception will differ, and so forth. But one of the interesting things to note about that diagram is that the 6 upper globes of our chain were all in a larger circle. Yes? Now, it's not just an idle fancy that she drew another circle around that. She presumably drew another circle around it to indicate that it was indeed a higher order entity which encompassed the ones that she had encircled in that particular way. Why the 7th is not included is something else that we could discuss.
It could be that somewhere else, when you were talking about the nature of these vehicles, she says quite definitely that every principle other than the objective physical one is not to be regarded in space and time, which gives it an identification, so to speak, in relation to the auric envelope, as we were talking about on the telephone, apart from that physical one which is at the bottom.
Okay. I have seen representations of the relationships of the globes to one another, which I think are a little fanciful. People have imagined that the globes are arranged one to the front, one to behind, one to the left, one to the right, and one up and one down, and perhaps one in the middle. Well, it makes a nice geometric pattern, but is it real? Others have said, well, they're all here, aren't they? And that all the other 6 globes are present here right now. Well, yes, they may be, but again, it's very misleading, because what you would be saying is that they are spatially here. Now this, I don't believe is the case. The spatial terms that we use, length, depth and breadth, and location to identify where we are in relation to anything else, apply to things within our set of perception and to nothing else. And it cannot have any meaning in relation to other globes. To say that they are here implies that they might have been 100 miles away, or 1,000 miles away, or 1,000,000 miles away. To say that if it's a meaningful thing to say that they're all here, it must have been equally possible that they weren't here, but they were somewhere else. And they could only be somewhere else if they were in some sort of spatial relationship to wherever here is. And seeing as I've already said that I don't think they can be in any spatial relationship to here, then it's meaningless to say that they're all here at the same time. They are in a different sense all here, but not in that sense. All right. The last major idea that I want to talk about today is one which, as I've said in the notes in the book, I think is grossly underrepresented in our literature. And that is summarized for you in paragraph 3.3, initially on page 6, and there are a number of supporting passages which substantiate this, starting on page 58. This is the idea introduced in the Mahatma letters that the globes to which we have just been referring belong to, or can be categorized as, spheres of cause or causes and spheres of effects. And if you're not familiar with this idea, then I do strongly suggest that you do a little bit of homework and read the passages starting on page 58, where I have extracted the relevant ones from the Mahatma letters, 5 of them, which illustrate this particular point. And much appears from these 5 passages. We're all familiar with the basic idea of cause and effect, he said grandly. I hope we all are. But however, we've dismissed this already this morning, haven't we? Joy has told us that our traditional notions of karma and reincarnation are to be not to be taken too literally. She's absolutely right. But having said that, let's see what is being illustrated in this particular set of ideas. The Mahatma gives a lovely description in the first of those passages, where he likens the spheres of cause and effects to a necklace or a chain of beads. Now, again, the mistake would be to take this as being physically so, but the idea, the basic idea that he has depicted there, I think is really rather beautiful. And if we'll say that, for sake of example, blue spheres that I'm drawing here represent the spheres of causes, and the sea, then there will be a sphere of effects linked to the next sphere of causes, the next sphere of effects, the next sphere of causes, and so on. I guess I don't need to take this too far. And what we have here is a thread running through it, a sutra, if you will. And here is the sutra running through it. This is your necklace on which the globes are hung. It is a concatenation, literally. If you're not familiar with the word concatenation, it means almost exactly what you see illustrated here. Now, the one has produced the other, which in turn produces the other in a rolling process as it goes along. As far as man is concerned, the sphere of causes is where he experiences what we call incarnation, and is a sphere of causes because within it we initiate new causes. We set the ball in motion. We disturb the harmony of the cosmos even further. We send out the ripples by dropping stones in the pond. We can't go on doing that indefinitely, otherwise the universal harmony would never re-establish itself. So having made as much of a mess as we dare in a sphere of causes, we spend a period of time in the after-death states in a sphere of effects, where the ripples, so to speak, to a degree, are allowed to calm down. And we experience the effects of whatever it is that we set in motion. Mostly we hope that that's a reasonably pleasant state, but it need not be. All the heavens and hells are really modelled on the subjective states which we might undergo in the sphere of effects. This in a rolling process, just as we inevitably must die, in our sphere of causes, so we are born into the sphere of effects. And inevitably, when the material that we bring with us, the experience from the previous incarnation, runs out, inevitably we must die to this sphere of effects and be reborn in the next world of causes. And so the concatenation of cause and effect rolls on, a new incarnation, a new death, a new sphere of effects, and so on as it moves through this particular cycle. This is the basic picture that they are painting in that first passage. And it's rather a beautiful one. But much else appears in these quoted passages. In the space of 5 minutes, I'm not really even going to be able to do it justice, I guess, which is a pity. Now, what I've just said is the picture as it relates to man. We have said that it is we who move through this, we, the actors in the drama, who move through this. But remember that these are not pre-constructed somewheres that we happen to go and inhabit. We make them. It is we who make the spheres of effects, just as we have already seen that it is the seven kingdoms who have constructed the objective, or what we see as the objective globes, the spheres of cause. These are our globes A, B, C, and so forth, as we normally talk of them. Just as we have, in terms of form, constructed our spheres of causes, so in our after-death states, we are constructing the spheres of effects. And what are we leaving in those spheres of effects? Well, we're leaving all our garbage behind. It's a sobering thought, isn't it? That the eons of human garbage, psychological garbage, has been left in these spheres of effects. Let me show you what I mean. The last of the 5 quoted passages, this is on page 59. The last of the 5, that is the second one up from the bottom. From first to last, every sphere has its world of effects, the passage through which will afford a place of final rest to each of the human principle, the seventh principle accepted. We saw earlier this afternoon, in that earlier passage where it said that each of the principles in man's constitution, or should we say each of his vehicles, is returned to its source at death and after. Well, this is saying not quite, because each time you pass through here, you are leaving behind the residue in the sphere of effects, and the sphere of effects is fleshed out, embodied by this and other processes going on in there. What you have left behind is making that sphere of effects. And in some cases, in some of its states, it really is pretty unpleasant. There was another of these passages talking about the sphere of effects, which I have not quoted in the book, where it talks about the relation of these spheres of effects to us. Imagine, if you will, that this is globe D. We're already busily creating the sphere of effects associated with globe D now. And that won't be too pleasant, I dare say, in some of its parts, in its karma locus and so forth. But what about the previous globe of effects? They say, referring to it, the world below ours, well, below, in this context, I believe, refers to this previous sphere of effects, is still worse, they say, and go on to elaborate some of the horrors that you might encounter there. It is the garbage, the trash that we have left behind in our onward progress. And what's this? Well, it goes up to make the it's part and parcel of whatever the globe is, just as these are linked in this particular way. Really, it's all part and parcel of whatever the globe happens to be. So if this is globe A, then the sphere of effects associated with globe A is all part and parcel of the substance that makes that whole globe up. We can distinguish between the two states, the sphere of causes and the sphere of effects, but we can, in another sense, take the whole lot together,
Do
lump
you
it all
see
together.
globe A's world of effects as affecting globe B, world of effect, world of causes?
I have tried to depict it in the way that it's indicated in the passage on 58, where it says, thus it becomes evident that every sphere of causes, and our earth is one, is not only interlinked with and surrounded by, but actually separated from its nearest neighbour, the higher world of causality, by an impenetrable atmosphere in the spiritual sense of effects bordering on and even interlinking, never mixing with the next sphere,
Never mixing.
but bordering on,
Yeah.
interlinking with.
Yeah. So it doesn't condition the next
I believe
world of
not.
causes.
I believe not. And it's this which is, of course, so much bound up with spiritualistic phenomenon, because it's bordering on. I mean, all what we've left behind in Karmaloka and Devachan, the shells and the like, border on, interlink with, but unless we actually evoke them,
There is, of
do
course, the
not
astral
affect.
record as well.
Yes, indeed.
Except for the seventh principle, it says.
Well,
Yes,
indeed.
That's not polluted.
The seventh principle couldn't possibly
Couldn't possibly.
be left behind.
In the reactivation, let us say, from the globe, graduating from globe G, the reactivation of globe A, would that reactivate the globe, the sphere of effects
That was left behind.
that was left behind?
I can't see that you could possibly leave it behind. I don't see that there is any way in which we can sidestep
Sidestep.
the effects that we've already generated.
In one sense, picking up the sisters in the sphere of causes would inevitably pick up the sisters
I
in
think so.
the sphere of effects.
I think so,
I would
yes.
think so.
I cannot see that it... Ultimately, it seems to me that we have got to clear this all up.
We have to clear it all up.
There is ultimately no garbage collector coming along behind us who is going to tidy up the sphere of effects
We
for
have
us.
to do that.
I believe so. Before all returns to harmony, somebody has got to digest this. What we need is Coyote to come along and eat it for us. But we're going to have to do that.
To do it.
Yeah. Well, it's just gone 5:30, folks. If you have any other questions, I'm happy enough to answer them, but you are free to go